Welcome to NABA Perspectives, where we look at key issues, trends, and stories that are shaping business, policy, and economy across Africa. This week, we are discussing Germany-Africa relations with Christoph Kannengießer, the CEO of the Afrika-Verein. Christoph Kannengießer, thank you so much for joining us on the NABA Perspectives podcast. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you. It's my pleasure.
Now, before we get into the topic of discussion, we're going to be talking about Africa-Germany relations and how these are changing amid, significant global political and economic change. But before we get to that, could you perhaps just give us a little bit of an introduction, a bit of context about Afrika-Verein for anyone who's watching who might not be familiar with the organization and what you do?
Yes, of course, I'd like to do that. First of all, Afrika-Verein translated into English is a German-African business association. So we are an association of German companies or mostly German companies doing business on the African continent. We have about 500 member companies covering about 85% of German economic activities on the ground in Africa. So we have the big DAX-listed companies such as Siemens, Volkswagen, Deutsche, and others, but also small and medium-sized and also very small companies. So we cover just the whole spectrum of companies doing business in Africa, all sectors from all regions, all over Germany. We have been founded just 90 years ago, so we are happy to celebrate our 90th anniversary this year. We do namely two things. First of all, we support our member companies by giving them advice and by providing a platform for exchange between themselves and African partners, decision makers from policy and businesses all over Africa. We do that by conducting about 80 to 100 events a year, from very big conferences such as the German African Energy Forum, which is our flagship format, which takes place this year on the 15th and 16th May in Hamburg, covering all kinds of topics about energy business in Africa, namely renewable energy, but also green hydrogen, but also oil and gas, of course. So this is one of the big ones. We do these kinds of events also in the field of health, in the fields of financing, in the fields of trade and investment, in the sector of agribusiness and others. But the main part of our activities in terms of events are roundtables in Berlin and elsewhere in Germany with African decision makers and German companies, small ones from 3 to 4 companies with a minister from a small African country, up to 200 people coming when states presidents or others are coming to Germany. We are in this field also a partner of the German federal government. So we are one of the business organizations organizing in Germany the so-called Compact with Africa Investment Summit. Last year we had 17 heads of states here in Berlin discussing with more than 700 German companies all kinds of opportunities in these specific 17 countries and beyond. The other part of our activity is that we are a lobby organization, so we try to open bottlenecks due to political framework in Germany, for instance, lacking financial guarantees for projects or investments, or also with African governments. We have a strong network with African governments, and often, namely small and medium-sized companies, need support in the field of networking and cooperating with African governments. And we provide this service for our companies. So we try to make it easier for German companies to be successful on the African continent.
Excellent. Thank you so much for a great introduction, really kind of helping to set the scene, and a big congratulations on your 90th anniversary. That is a very impressive milestone. Yeah. Now, let's get into the meat of the discussion. You've kind of already touched on the first thing I want to ask you about, which is that in recent years, we have seen at the policy level in Germany a real increasing focus on engagement with Africa, both politically, diplomatically, but very importantly also economically, something that was very much pushed by Angela Merkel, the former chancellor, and clearly is still something that is a priority of the new government that has come in. Could you give us a bit of an understanding of why it is that Germany seems to be paying more attention to Africa? What's driving this interest?
Yeah, I think in both cases with Angela Merkel, but as well as with the current government, it has been namely political motivation to focus more on Africa and to focus more on also the economic relations between Germany and Africa. Angela Merkel in 2015 was faced with a migration crisis in Germany and in Europe. And the German media and policy, and also Angela Merkel, got aware that there are potential additional migrants coming from Africa if we don't do more to overcome the lack of economic opportunities for young Africans. And at that time, Angela Merkel understood quite well that it is not development aid what creates jobs for young people, but businesses. And she got aware that the German footprint on the African continent, the footprint of German companies creating jobs there, is not very important. And she discussed with us and others what could be done to change that. And this was the starting point of what we call the G20 Compact with Africa. During the 2017 presidency of Germany of the G20, this scheme was decided. And since that time, we see more engagement of the German government in terms of motivating companies to invest in Africa, but also of supporting African countries to improve their investment conditions and the framework they provide for German companies in their respective countries. And the government of Angela Merkel has changed some of the instruments in development aid and financing support, guarantees, and so forth. And this has been continued by Olaf Scholz. But I think there is an additional motivation right now for the German government, which is also pushed forward by two political developments. One is climate change, of course. The German government is aware that fighting climate change is not possible without the African continent. Here in Germany, we very much count on replacing oil and gas by green hydrogen, for instance. But this is not possible if you don't use the production capacities which the African continent provides. This is just one example. And the other one is the geopolitical change we see all over the world. And when you look at the balance sheet of German exports and foreign direct investments, you see a lot of Russia and China, and you see very few Africa. And this is part of the problem we have currently. And this is something we should change, and the German government is aware that it does not go without saying. It is necessary to support that, to flank that politically, and that's why we see more focus on German-African business relations, but there is still a lot of work to do for Afrika-Verein in this field, but because we are by far not where we should be if we take the ambitions serious.
Well, you preempted me, because my follow-up was going to be, how effective is this pivot, this turn towards Africa proving to be? And where do you see some of maybe the shortcomings or challenges that need to be addressed to really get this going in terms of investment and economic cooperation?
So first of all, it is, of course, not something where you change some instruments and then you see just hundreds of millions of foreign direct investments in African countries. This is something which takes time. And I think it is something which needs also the right incentives, and the incentives have to be significant because for German companies, I think there are two main challenges. The first one is that they are indeed oriented towards other markets, Asia, Eastern Europe, also the United States. And you need kind of a mind shift, because for decades, Africa has not played any important role or part of very few countries such as South Africa or Tunisia or Egypt. The African continent as a whole has not played any significant role for most German companies. So this is the first thing. And the second thing is also kind of a structural challenge here in Germany. We have a very fragmented economy. We are an economy of internationalized small and medium-sized companies. And for those companies, of course, Africa provides a lot of challenges, because you need to cover, you have to decide among 54 countries. You have to take into consideration political developments and market developments in more than one or two or three big markets. You have a lot of smaller markets, and this is, of course, the smaller a company is, the more challenging it is to cover all these markets. So this is something, I think, which needs also a bit more political support when you want to change that, to face these challenges and to create kind of a level playing field also for German SMEs when it comes to compete with big players from other countries, and namely with big players from countries which don't come from the OECD scheme, and which play in competition along very different rules than we do here in Europe and in the OECD ecosystem.
I think you've touched on a really critical issue here, which is that across Africa, what we're seeing is this real sort of diversification of the continent's international partnerships as well. We know that China, of course, is very heavily invested across Africa. We know that the US has ambitions to expand, but it's not just that, of course. It's India, it's Turkey, it's the Gulf states, and so on and so forth. And I to your point around, this presents a challenge in terms of how you strategically engage with African economies. What's your sense of, one, the understanding amongst the government in Germany and the political system in general? But what I also would like to get a sense from you is whether the appetite amongst business is growing as well. I recall reading about a survey that Afrika-Verein carried out, I think about a year and a half ago, where a majority of German companies were planning to ramp up their investment. So how are these dynamics playing out in Germany on the policy side, but also on the investment side?
Yeah, so when you look at businesses, I think, yes, we see a rising interest for Africa. And it is obvious that more and more companies are aware or get aware that there is a need for diversification. And that, of course, Africa is one of the places where this kind of diversification can happen. And that's why we see more and more companies asking questions, more and more companies developing kind of strategies for their companies. And we have to now make out of it tangible projects, trade in infrastructure projects, energy projects, but also in foreign direct investments. And the challenge is, I think, to select among the great number of countries and opportunities you see in Africa, and to look for the right fit, and to create as much as possible success stories for German companies instead of letting them alone. So I think this is a phase in which we are, and of course, the news about what's happening in Africa are not always so easy to comment on, and to keep a spirit of optimism with Africa, because there are of course also or there are not always good news. There are often also complicated news which we have to interpret, and which of course contribute from time to time also to some reluctancy to really start doing business on the African continent. But we see change, and hopefully we take up speed with that.
Yes, and of course that challenge of the bad news that comes out of Africa is presumably made harder when you're already dealing with companies that maybe are quite conservative about their risk appetite for a region like the continent. Now, look, you've made the point, a very important point, and I just want to make it absolutely clear so anyone who's watching this doesn't get the wrong idea. We fully understand Africa is not a country. We speak in general terms, but of course we understand that these are 54 countries, very diverse, very different economies, very different opportunity sets. You've touched on a couple of the priorities that are coming through in terms of Germany-Africa relations. Energy is obviously and unsurprisingly at the top of that list, given events that we have seen in the last couple of years, climate change as well. And I think you make the excellent point that these are issues, these are challenges that cannot realistically be addressed at the global level without Africa. But if we go beyond these sectors, where else would you say are things happening? Where are the opportunities for German businesses, for example? And are there focus countries or priority markets perhaps that are starting to come through where we might see more investment from Germany into the continent?
So first of all, if you look at opportunities for German companies, you have to look at the sectors where German companies are strong in, and all over the world, the first thing you connotate with Germany are cars, and that's why, of course, automotive industry is one of the very interesting sectors, and we see for a couple of years now a rising interest, not only for export of used cars to Africa, but of developing strategies to fulfill the mobility needs on the African continent with production on the continent. This is also something which is not realistically to realize in 2 or 3 years, but there are there's a lot of research done, the market research done. There is a lot of looking at the framework. There is a lot of discussion with the European Union and African countries about trade policies and all these kinds of things you need to solve when you want to successfully establish car plants in African countries. This is, I think, one important field, and it is not only about car manufacturing, but it is also about suppliers. This is a field where North Africa is an extremely important place where diversification can take place. diversification, so production which is no longer pricely competitive in Europe, but which can be competitive in North African countries. We see concrete investments in this field, but also consumer goods such as fridge or washing machines or other parts which are connotated with companies such as Siemens, Bosch, Miele, and others here in Germany. Then you see chemical industry. This is an important industry in Germany. As you know, BASF is the biggest producer of chemicals all over the world. And when you look at local fertilizer production, for instance, there are lots of African countries interested in having more investments in this field. I see a lot of opportunities in this field. Medical products, you see the vaccine production unit of BioNTech just recently implemented in Rwanda, for instance. But there are other activities from companies such as Merck or B. Braun in different African countries. So health is pharmaceuticals. Health is an important field. Agribusiness and the food industry is an important field of activities, and a field where, of course, a lot can happen. Additionally, infrastructure. It is not so much about building streets or roads, but technology-driven infrastructure such as harbors or airports, but also in housing. Companies such as Knauf or Heidelberger are producing their products for housing and construction of buildings in African countries. So these are fields, I think, which are interesting. IT, namely IT. IT stuff for governments. This is something where you have a lot of German companies being extremely successful already and having an important footprint on the continent, but there is room for more. So these are, I think, fields where German economy can make a difference and can contribute a lot.
Quite diverse, and all of them, I think it's worth pointing out, in their own way, quite instrumental to driving economic development. And growth, which of course is, which is the all-important objective in terms of where Africa goes. Just a very quick follow-up on the automotive industry. Yeah, just to underline your point, Volkswagen has really pushed in terms of developing, its presence on the continent, as you said, moving beyond just exporting cars, but also producing locally. Now, of course, the car industry is shifting towards electric vehicles, and that is now, that's the big story. And there, North Africa, places like Morocco, is some interesting things happening there. Do you see that being an opportunity as well in terms of the German car industry on the continent, or is it maybe too early?
It is indeed relatively controversial. Because there is a lack of electricity in most African countries. And of course, this makes the question obvious whether it is a good idea to use the electricity for cars, or whether there are alternatives. I think we have to go step by step. I think in terms of sustainability, but also when it comes to climate protection, any kind of modernization is a step in the right direction. So modern fuels, state-of-the-art fuels for existing cars can already make a big difference. Modern cars with modern fuels can make an even bigger difference. And then you have the question of synthetic fuels, of biofuels, and then of course also the question of electric mobility. I think it depends on the country. It depends on the level of energy production, electricity production, whether it's feasible to also implement electric mobility in Africa. But when you look at the pioneer project of Volkswagen in Rwanda with Siemens, it is about electric vehicles. So it is part of the concept, but it is not the only pillar on which we stand.
And which markets, which countries, which economies are really sort of at the top of the list when it comes to German investment into the continent?
There are, of course, those where our economy is already relatively present. It is in North Africa, Tunisia and Morocco and Egypt, of course. And among these three countries, Tunisia is the country where we have by far the most German investments, but we see diversification towards the other countries. I've learned over the last couple of weeks that also the Algerian government is doing an important effort to make investment in Algeria, and namely also engagement of small and medium-sized companies more attractive. And if that happens, I'm quite convinced that also Algeria will play an important role. So these North African countries are indeed extremely interesting, namely in terms of diversification. In Sub-Saharan Africa, I think it depends a lot on the market size and on the investment climate. Market size wise, countries such as Nigeria, Ethiopia, Kenya are extremely interesting. South Africa is traditionally one of the places where German companies are well invested, and my impression is that they are invested to stay and not to go, even when times are more difficult than in the past. The German companies are convinced that South Africa will get back on track over the next couple of years. So there's a lot to do, and these are also opportunities. And then other countries are interesting along the specific challenges. So namely, when it comes to renewable energy, climate change, the production of hydrogen, there are some places which are predestinated for the production of green hydrogen. We have really important projects in Namibia, for instance. We have smaller ones in Angola. We have plans in Mauritania, in Morocco, in Egypt. But there are even other countries which have extremely good, South Africa, which have very good conditions due to the climate, to having sun, wind, place, water, whatever you need to produce sustainably hydrogen and to bring it to Europe, or to use this for industrial production locally. I think this is an issue which will play a rising role over the next couple of years. So green steels, for instance, this is part of the concept of Namibia, for instance. So there are new kind of hubs developing alongside these new challenges in terms of the energy hunger of European industries, but also the search of industries to find places where they can produce energy intensive products without climate without a climate footprint or a CO2 footprint, or with a much smaller footprint than it is possible here in Europe. And I think there are a lot of destinations where these developments will play a decisive role over the next couple of years.
What about more traditional energy producers? And I know that this is contentious, of course, with the global transition, but places like Nigeria, very gas rich. Olaf Scholz was down there just a few months ago. Senegal, of course, is developing massive gas reserves, and I believe Olaf Scholz also visited Senegal about a year and a half ago or so. Those are also part of the mix one imagines here.
Yeah. But this is, I think, part of the story, which is not so convincing when you look at the storyline Germany tells. We are very much interested for a transition or transitionary period to take advantage of LNG in Nigeria or in Senegal. But at the same time, we don't allow German companies to export gas turbines to just these countries. No, we don't. There are no states guarantees, and with that, it is not possible for German companies to offer these kinds of turbines, for instance, to competitive conditions. So there we are really. I think, the credibility of Germany in this field, I think, is not as high as that. And I think we should question ourselves whether this is a good approach, because I think that in Africa, when it comes to industrialization, there is the same grade of legitimacy to use modern gas fuel turbines and plants than here in Europe. Why not? So and gas is in most cases better than any kind of alternative, which could be coal, which could be wood, with all the bad impact for people and for the environment and the climate. And that's why I think we should be more offensive also to cooperate in these fields. It is at the end of the day the same with commodities also. We need a lot of commodities here for our industry, namely when we want to transform our automotive industry to electricity. And we should, of course, be more offensive also when it comes to invest in this field and to establish also value addition around commodities in African countries. And we have some competencies also in our industry, but these processes have to be moderated by the government. It is nothing which a very much fragmented industry can organize by themselves. We need, I think, German government and European Union engagement in this field when we want to succeed, and it is in the interest of our African partners as well.
Yes. The critical mineral space is very quickly becoming, no pun intended, but it is becoming a very critical area of investment, and and the whole question of how you transition into a more sustainable economy. Now, there's so much more that we could discuss, but we do have to wrap up. We are officially already out of time. But the final question I want to put to you, and you've already alluded to bits and pieces of it here and there, but it's the question of, okay, where do we go next? How does this develop? How does this evolve? Or perhaps more to the point, what would you like to see happen in terms of Germany-Africa relations over, say, the next 5 years? Where should the priorities be? Where do you see some of the weaknesses? And in an ideal world, where are we 5 years from now?
So, first of all, in 5 years from now, I would love to see German FDI being not at 12 billion euro, but at 25. So doubling this relatively small amount of German foreign direct investment in Africa, I think it's possible. And it would be, I think, make a difference, and should also motivate more and more companies and to scale that up. Yeah, but it has to start right now. The second point is strategically, I hope that we have a common approach, government and business, how we deepen our footprint there, how we not only consolidate but strengthen our political ties to the African continent. And this has a lot to do also with economic engagement from my point of view. And this has to be done collectively. This is not the government or the private sector. This should be worked out together in a common strategy, namely in the field of commodities, value addition, industrialization, but also in the important field of green hydrogen, renewable energy, the export of these resources towards Europe without neglecting the needs of the local population. Also in this field, policy has to play its role. And I hope that we see over the next couple of years really a European strategy with Africa, because if we look at the competition of systems, we shouldn't do that country by country. We definitely have an interest to do that together with our European partners, and not only in the EU, but beyond that. So all the countries here in Europe, which are part of our political family in a broader sense, should be a part of that. So I also hope that we see much more joint ventures from European companies from different European countries in Africa. So I would like to have some also from Norwegian companies with German companies, and as NABA and Afrika-Verein are collaborating as close as we do, I think this should be something we should work with together.
All I can say there is we're definitely on the same page with that one. Yeah. Very wise words there. I think it's very good advice. I hope that the politicians are listening, and I hope that the business leaders in Germany are listening. What I have no doubt about is that the Afrika-Verein isn't going to stop pushing and isn't going to slow down its efforts. Christoph, thank you so much for joining us on NABA Perspective. It's been a great discussion. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Landre, and see you soon again.